It's all right. But even when I started to get to know these guys and really find out what it was that they were dealing with, it kind of opened my eyes to see how it was they were coming about this information. And a lot of it was done through what they called contact with aliens. You know, they were intentionally trying to have dreams, lucid dreaming, and abduction experiences where they could have this technology revealed to them and other schematics being able to give into them. And inside that world of big tech, and especially in data storage, this was the cutting edge where people were taking hallucinogenic drugs and they were trying to utilize ways of tapping into mediums. And to me, it was nothing different than what I read in the scriptures with what Saul was doing to try to talk to Samuel. It's people that were consulting mediums and going and talking to these other spirits. This has been going on forever, where people are trying to go about looking for a way to have a breakthrough, and they're willing to sell themselves out for it. They're willing to turn to the left-hand path in order to embrace that and find that. But this story has been playing out for a long time, where you can communicate with these deities. There is a spiritual realm out there that you can start dialing into, and you don't know what you're going to get. But I'll tell you what, they're looking all the time. They're always hungry and never satisfied. They are always lusting and never able to be filled up. They are thirsty and perpetually desiring somebody to fill that cup for them. And so when mankind is willing to volunteer for that, there is always a cost that comes with that. And those technological breakthroughs and some of that black sciences, they really are black sciences. This is what Jack Parson was doing in the deserts with L. Ron Hubbard and their Babylon working rituals and their moon children. You know, they're literally actively giving birth to through demonic power during rituals, hybridizing children, infecting them with demons, starting them out through this ritual magic so that they can have these breakthroughs and launch jet propulsion laboratories. This is the origins of so much of our most advanced sciences, and whether or not people are readily able to understand that, but it is built on this dark magic, and that prospers, and we get to see the fruit of it later on in life. There's a reason that there's this bloodshed and this violence and this mutual reciprocity of hatred, because the origins of so much of this, that's where they come from.
Yeah, it's fascinating in a way. It's, you know, after interviewing several Satanists that have come to the light, the stories of their rituals, they sound so extreme that most people struggle to accept them as reality. But it is the truth. You nailed it earlier. There's some shape shifting involved. There is angelic powers that are not supposed to be used right now. You know, those are set aside for the Father and His glory. But the fallen ones, they are using them now for their kingdom of darkness. When you spent some time underground, did you get to see any of the tunnel networks that are interconnected between all the different states and cities?
I never saw interconnectedness between states. I saw them between cities, especially in Colorado Springs and Fort Carson and the United States Air Force Academy, Black Forest, this area that was north of there. There was a continuity of a tunnel system that went between there. I didn't spend a whole lot of time in there, but I had interactions
Yeah.
in there and was driven at times between those bases. But the type of infrastructure that I saw in particular in Colorado Springs was almost exclusively looked like 1950s, 1960s tunnel systems, very much like what I would believe was built out in Cold War era. And what the few other places where I did see deep underground military bases where I saw more advanced technology had hyper rail systems that were built with, like I talked about earlier, neptunium, which was a very different metal alloy, stuff that did not require circuits, didn't require any other thing, where the body of the vehicles themselves was the material that they needed to actually build the circuits out of. So that I didn't spend as much time in, but I was kind of shown that as, hey, these are the visions of what it is that we're actually working with and what it is that we want you to be a designer and a participant of. However, that was never the carrot that I ended up getting at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's wait, a gentleman that I had on the show earlier this year. His name's Dr. Thrapp. He spent a lot of time involved in Nevada, in the desert out there, in S4 and a couple other places where they were experimenting with this was years ago too. You know, they were experimenting with that blue beam technology, and it's fascinating because he says even back then, this was in the 70s that he was talking about this. how it was completely mind blowing to see what they are doing. And a lot of people struggle to digest the fact that the technology they have on shelves are probably 50 years ahead of what they have released to the public. Though you could probably, you understand where I'm coming from, that there
Yeah.
is some just fascinating stuff. And I think what we're seeing in the skies, have you noticed such a large increase in these quote drones in masses over the cities?
Yeah.
Over, I think it's the
Norfolk.
same people. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. It's all the same. You know, people call it, they've changed the names from UFOs to UAPs to drones, but it's a deflection point. But what it is it's all the same. It's that original gods of old, you know, those fallen ones, their offspring. That it's very demonic. I wonder why they are bringing them out, or why they are out so heavily now. Because there's been a lot of predicted programming over the years for what is happening. It makes you just wonder what they have on deck, because they're clearly planting seeds.
I mean, many of those seeds too have been, as you said, pre-programmed decades ago. But any of the technology that we get handed out tends to be 40 to 50 years behind what the military has already been using it for. You know, there was hypersonic drones that were being launched in 1962. You know, the D-21 off the SR-71 Blackbird. This is a drone that would detach from this thing and fly hypersonically into other nations, fly over them to do drone reconnaissance at Mach 3 or higher. This is, you know, we're sitting here now talking about hypersonic missiles and drones, and this stuff is old,
Yes.
very old. And so when we
Yeah.
see something that's new, you know, like you talked about with UFOs, fundamentally what they are, a lot of them, you're dealing between some side that's just technology, purely technology, mankind technology, and other side that's ophanum. You know, this is the spiritual, like these are wheels within wheels, like they're described in Ezekiel, but these are the literal bodies, the entities themselves have these light bodies, and they are the ones that are carrying this stuff around and moving around. And so I think the increase of it on one side is to fit a narrative that they want to be able to disclose that, you know, whether it's the push towards the great alien threat that they have pre-programmed and conditioned us, the Independence Day style of how we can unite humanity against a common enemy through aliens, you know, like George Bush was trying to hallmark people and put in their minds that this is how we can establish a great world order, would require such a significant threat to come against us, whether it's asteroids or whether it's aliens. So much of it you're seeing put into the public mouthpiece on a perpetual basis, even a lot like in the congressional hearings that are going on right now too, where you have clearly assets for the government who are being masqueraded as if these are the whistleblowers who are coming against it, really, really deceptively so, to I mean, put forth some of the most deceptive evidence that they could, rather than actually dipping into the black bag of showing what's really going on here. There's a guy named who goes by Dark Journalist on YouTube who does a much better
Yeah, I
job
like
at
him.
diving into the UFO file. Yeah, he's one of the better reporters that I've ever found in dealing with that subject, and in particular the actual X files and the X weapons and everything else.
Did you? He had a recent episode where they talked about the real motive behind why JFK was taken out, because he was on the way to a very specific meeting where there was going to be a speech given that would reveal essentially what we're talking about right now, and how there was technologies that he wanted to share, especially stuff that was involved in nuclear stuff based off of things collected from experiments in Antarctica, and he wanted to bring all this stuff to light. He did a really good episode on that. It was really fascinating. I like his show. He has some really interesting guests that talk about some really interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Well, to me, what turned me on to any of his content initially too was the discussion of the X, you know, because that was the branding, my family's branding on they call them pet projects, you know, the split personality multiples and where they're put in. Well, the ones that were put into the deep sciences and a lot of the military side had this branding of the circle with the X on it. And this was their version of weapons. X weapons technology was literally demonized super intelligence. They wanted to weaponize the intelligence and infiltrate the military industrial complex through those means. And so I had never really seen many people covering the actual X files and the X weapons that were being developed. And then when I stumbled onto his series, and that was one of the first breakthroughs that I ever got to see a lot of vindication for what it is that this was operating. Because you don't have, like Kelly Johnson doesn't just pop up onto the radar and come out with all of these different breakthrough technologies through Lockheed Skunk Works out of nowhere. There are people who are being fed this information and given these technologies to be able to bring them to the masses. But then you have an entire, people don't understand the underground science community, and it's where so many people who have some of the greatest breakthroughs that have ever happened in science and technologies are literally extinguished from the surface of the earth and moved down into the actual underworld. It's not some like hypothetical theoretical thing I'm describing. There's an entire civilization of humanity that lives underground perpetually here in the United States in particular, and that's where so much of that technology gets pushed and is perpetually being pushed, because they're building an underworld army. They're building a completely different army so that they can, in my opinion, pull off one of the great deceptions that there is these outside invaders coming from other planets to try to cause all of this chaos and war. Whereas I really believe the vast majority of the real enemy is going to be coming from underground, coming up onto the earth to exact this horrific violence and this great deception. And I believe that's why there's been so much of that pushed down into the underworld, where anybody who had those breakthrough technologies that was trying to bring them to the surface was extinguished, because that is not going to fit their narrative. If anybody got access, if we had access, just for instance, if we actually had access to just plutonium, just us personally as people, plutonium-238 in particular, where we could make our own small reactors, and it doesn't even have to be a nuclear reactor like people think and get all freaked out and scary again, but you can do like radioisotope thermoelectric generators that have no moving parts. They're not necessarily efficient, but you can have a hot rock that burns super hot for 80 years and be able to generate electricity on a small scale for every individual. Just that level of really simple technology that could be released to people, that changes their ability for people to be in the house of bondage. That would set people free. That would keep them off of the teat of normalized energy production. And as soon as that breakthrough is authorized to the masses, you have this freedom of thought and creativity, where people aren't having to pursue the chasing of the rat race in order to survive and make ends meet on any given day. But you would have completely different exploration and this abounding freedom that would come to mankind. But that's been continually squelched, so that the only time they're ever given that sense of escape is through the versions of entertainment that they authorize. It's through the versions of travel that they legalize. But that control mechanism disappears when you do finally give people access to unlimited energy or any of those other technologies. And that's why they're so quickly stifled and subjugated.
Yeah.